Okay. In the news this week, a Bainbridge Island man is trying to get overturned our state's cyberstalking law. Here's the outlines of the story. Clarence Moriwaki lives on Bainbridge Island. He's done a ton of work to memorialize the internment of Japanese Americans during World War II as an injustice that we shouldn't repeat. His neighbor, Richard Rynearson, posted on Moriwaki's Facebook page that America also indefinitely detains people without charge for being suspected terrorists. Why don't you protest that injustice? Well, Rynearson posted on Moriwaki's page repeatedly. Moriwaki blocked him. So Rynearson created his own Facebook page that he called Clarence Moriwaki of Bainbridge Island. He would later rename it Not Clarence Moriwaki of Bainbridge Island. True. He posted that Moriwaki is unfit to be president or board member for the Japanese Internment Memorial. He texted Moriwaki repeatedly. Quote, "He just won't leave me alone," Moriwaki says. Our state cyberstalking law says you cannot send messages that are anonymous, repeated, or obscene with intent to harass, intimidate, torment, or embarrass any other person. Rynearson's lawyer says the law is too broad. Harass, torment, embarrass, who defines those? The prosecutor? Quote, "Your freedom to speak shouldn't turn on a prosecutor's judgments about whether your intentions were pure." So we'll talk a little about this law. Ijeoma, I just know that you deal with social media vitriol. So I wondered, would you say you have been illegally cyberstalked?
Oh, yeah, definitely. I mean, I've been stalked in a way that if it weren't happening on the internet, I would be able to get legal action. But because it's on the internet, people don't take it seriously.
But we have a cyberstalking law. You think it wouldn't if you press charges? Have you thought about pressing charges?
You know, I've definitely forwarded things to the police and have heard nothing back. I mean, I've gotten images of dead bodies. I've gotten actual threats that aren't taken seriously. I do think that something needs to be done. I do think the law needs to be more tough. This, I think, is so vague as to not actually protect anyone because it's hard to consistently enforce. And I think that it can actually, in turn, be used by those with more power against those who are perhaps trying to speak up for other people. And I think that's where I'm really concerned. But
Meaning that could get called harassing?
Oh,
behavior?
certainly, yeah. You know, I mean, if you look at, like, right now, the Supreme Court just said that, you know, that Trump can't block people anymore for sending in messages. He's the president, you know, and those sorts of things where you're actually just speaking truth to power, maybe hitting people with an inconvenient truth, that should be allowed, even if it embarrasses them. But I do see, you know, certain lines. This guy crossed a lot of different lines that even if this law, I think, was more tightly written, would have gone without it. I've had the same thing happen where people create new accounts after you block them. You know, they create websites, they create all sorts of things, and their goal is to harass. But someone just, you know, people talk about how much they despise me all the time, and so long as they're talking about it over there, I'm fine. But when they try to, interrupt my day over and over and over and intimidate me and make me feel unsafe, that's when we're crossing some territory. But this law, I just don't know if it actually helps anyone. And I think it could just as easily be used against those who rely upon the internet as their only way of getting a platform or getting a message out there, especially when dealing with more powerful people who are likely going to be the first to utilize these laws because they have lawyers and they have the money to do so.
GeekWire's Monica Nicholsberg, has GeekWire followed this cyber-stalking law?
A little bit, yeah. I mean, I think it speaks to this broader trend, which is we just don't know how to deal with speech online. And the First Amendment questions are really, really interesting. Like, it reminds me of the 3D printed gun manuals discussion that we've been having because the person who wanted to distribute these tutorials for 3D printing your own guns, he actually made a First Amendment claim, which was that he's not trying to sell these plans. It's his right to speak, to spread information. That's protected by the Constitution. But I think a lot of people agree that there's a certain type of speech that's dangerous or harmful. And we just, online in this space that's so unregulated and that has been able to foster a lot of really incredible things, a lot of activism because it's kind of a Wild West, we also have a lot of hate and a lot of intimidation, and we don't know how to deal with that.
It's pretty easy to write an anti-stalking law. It is much harder to write an anti-cyber-stalking law. Stalking is typically a one-on-one event. So if I go in front of someone's house and I knock on their door every day and I tell them that I don't like them for all these reasons, I mean, I can be prosecuted. I mean, there's some sense in which that violates this person's right to be left alone, right? And that is stalking, and that's prosecutable, and we're pretty clear about that. But I agree with what Monica says, that online, it's a Wild West. The problem with online is that when you do that same thing, in effect, online, so I'm not going to someone's door, but I'm posting every day on a Facebook page or an Instagram or Twitter, suddenly I'm presenting not just to one person, I'm presenting to the world, and suddenly the First Amendment comes into play big time. So it's very hard to regulate that. And the laws we have often bump up against the First Amendment. I think our law is probably too loose and probably will lose the First Amendment challenge by this gentleman. You can't write a law that you write for one-on-one harassment on the internet, because it's a public forum. I'm allowed to go in Westlake and do a lot of things I couldn't do one-on-one to a person, in terms of the proverbial soapbox.
Ijoma, I have a question about your experience, but I also don't know if you want to give this subject oxygen or not. Do you want me to ask away?
Go ahead.
Well, I haven't felt anything close to cyberstalked, and so to me, I hear these things at a distance. And anymore, like sometimes we'll be in as we call it, a pitch meeting. We're talking, what are we going to discuss on the radio? And a topic might come up, and someone will say, and they got death threats. And my reaction is, on what topic does somebody not get a death threat? It's becomes so common to me that it doesn't raise my raise my temperature. Like, yeah, people do it all the time. I'm curious how blasé or how concerned you are at these reactions.
I have definitely had times where I've had to leave my house for the evening and take my kids out of the house, especially when it's local. Usually if it's not local, I take it with a grain of salt. But now that we have swatting, which has killed people, that people can reach you from anywhere, but I've definitely had local people saying that they know where I live, they know people who know where I live, and I've had to take my children out of my house for the evening. I've had to do that a couple of times, and we shouldn't have to live like that. I have friends who've had their addresses sent to them by people who've been able to find it just to let them know that they can get to them. These aren't benign. These are ways of trying to force people out of public spaces and let them know that they can get to them and that they aren't safe. And it should be treated that way, because that's what stalking is, right? That's what stalking and harassment is. It's exerting control over people and letting them know that you control their sense of safety, their well-being, that their life, your life is in their hands, and that's exactly what cyberstalking is as well. And the effect is just as strong, if not stronger, because we are everywhere on the internet. And people can find you in so many different ways, and they don't even have to touch you or be in the same state or the same country in order to have a life and death impact on your life. And that's dangerous. The amount of things I have to lock down for my children just for talking about race is really sad. And nobody should have to do that. We shouldn't have to do that in order to exist in the public space.
And well, let me just say, obviously, they're trying to grapple with this. I mean, it's not just that there's no solution. I mean,
who's they?
Well,
the social media companies, legislators.
Yeah, I mean, typically, these are laws that come from cities or counties or states, even the federal government. But there is a provision in this law that says if you're threatening the life of someone, I mean, that's different than sort of embarrassing, right? I mean, embarrassing feels like a little too close to First Amendment protection stuff. If you're just embarrassing someone, sort of being critical of someone, that's a different, but there is provisions in here for life-threatening, or lewd, that kind of stuff. So it's not like anything goes, and some of this stuff is being prosecuted, but when we're talking about general criticism, I mean, the real meat of this guy's case is he allowed to set up a website that's criticizing his neighbor, apparently, but someone who lives close to them, but this person who is leading the charge to try and do an internment memorial in Bainbridge Island. And he's making, claims that are political, and you might like them or not like them, but That's a tough one. That's a tougher one to limit. That's the First Amendment problem. Not the life-threatening stuff really should be attacked and prosecuted, and we really do have laws that are trying to do that, and probably do that without worrying about the First Amendment.
I mean, they don't really do well. First, I just want to make sure that's known, and I want people to understand too that like this case is one separate thing, and this guy sounds like a peach, by the way. But what women and marginalized people, what women, trans activists, what activists of color face each and every single day in every aspect of their lives, beyond threats, but just trying to navigate anything without constant harassment, constant ridicule, is untenable. And I really would like to see law enforcement actually start looking at these platforms and what they enable. And when it comes down to it, they're creating this space where marginalized people can be routinely harassed, and they profit off of that. And that is honestly, I think, if we're going to have a chance, instead of proving each individual case, I think it needs to come to the platforms. If they're going to make money off of it, they need to be responsible with what comes with that money. And that means that the pain and suffering of marginalized people on these platforms, they need to be responsible for it.
Yeah, there absolutely is a responsibility that the companies who build these products need to bear, and that we should have nimble laws written for this moment in time, certainly, and we should have better enforcement of them, like the fact that you've reported a lot of these instances and not heard anything back, that's a problem. But I also think we're reaching this reckoning point where it's no longer acceptable for a company like Facebook or Twitter to say, well, we can't control it. You know, it's just an open forum. It's just a public square, because when you build something, you take responsibility for it. And the stories that we're hearing more and more is that they do actually take a very active hand in what stays on the platforms and what doesn't. So I think just acting like it's the same kind of First Amendment protected open space as a town hall is not really sufficient to anyone anymore.
I think they have to clean up their act, these platforms, but I think we all have to just recognize and accept something, which is that we have all, the First Amendment rights of all of us have expanded. When you add these platforms, it used to be that you could kind of like write a letter to the editor or go to Westlake with your sign and your megaphone. I mean, that was how you got your speech out. Now you have all these different ways to get your speech out. It's been wonderful. All kinds of downsides, but all kinds of upsides. You can go to I was about to say MySpace, that dates me. Twitter and Facebook and all these things. I mean, there's so much more First Amendment opportunities, but let's be real, it comes with First Amendment vulnerabilities. That means that we're all more susceptible to kind of free speech criticism and free speech, that is the world we live in. And there's no turning back.
But we're not actually equally susceptible, and I think that's something we need to look at. Try saying men are trash on Facebook and see how long your account lasts. But you can send me images of my face photoshopped onto the body of a monkey, and that will be within their guidelines. I mean, try it. Anyone try saying men are trash on Facebook tomorrow and see how quickly that's taken down.
Men are trash?
Yeah,
really?
You cannot say that without your account being suspended or the post being taken down. But people can literally send me threats, can tell me that they hope that I'm sexually assaulted or that my family is killed. And that's within guidelines. There are people behind these decisions. There are people who built this machine, and they built it in their image, and they decide what's appropriate or not, and we have every right to hold them accountable for that instead of saying it's the way it is, because it's not the way it has to be. It's the way it is because we let it become the way it is. But we can ask for something better.
We've been discussing a challenge to Washington State's cyberstalking law. Ijeoma, thank you for that.
Thank you.
Ijeoma Oluo, New York Times bestselling author of So You Want to Talk About Race. We're also with Q13 political analyst C.R. Douglas and GeekWire's civic innovation editor Monica Nicholsberg, counting down, discussing, digesting, debating the week gone by on KUOW's Week in Review with some friends at the Neptune Theater.